The blizzard hit like something personal. 2 a.m., a Colorado mountain highway buried under 4 feet of snow, zero visibility, and no cell service for 30 miles in either direction. Ethan Calloway almost didn't stop. He saw the dark shape against the guardrail and told himself it was a drift, told himself whoever it was had already called for help, told himself his daughter was waiting, and the storm was getting worse. He slowed down anyway. He got out anyway. And when he pulled open that crumpled SUV door and found the woman slumped against the steering wheel, bleeding and barely breathing, he understood that some decisions don't ask for your permission, they just happen, and you either answer them or you don't. If this kind of story is what you've been looking for, people tested by impossible moments, making choices that cost them everything, then subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The drive should have taken 40 minutes. Ethan had done it 100 times down Route 9 from the Halverson property, past the 2 dead pine trees that marked the left fork, and then the long straight stretch toward his cabin on the eastern edge of the valley. In good weather, with the windows down and the radio working, it was the kind of drive that could almost make a man feel like his life had settled into something manageable. But this was not good weather. This was a Category 3 blizzard the forecasters had been warning about for 3 days, while everyone in Creston County quietly hoped they were wrong. They weren't wrong. Ethan gripped the wheel of his truck with both hands and kept his speed at 15 miles an hour, which felt reckless. The headlights caught nothing useful, just white, sheets of it moving sideways, the wind loud enough that he could hear it through the door seals. The truck was old, but the tires were good, and he knew this road the way he knew the layout of rooms he'd once had to move through in total darkness. By memory, by feel, by the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 repetitions. He'd left the Halverson place around midnight. Bud Halverson was 81 years old and lived alone up the ridge, and his furnace had quit sometime Monday afternoon. Ethan had gotten the call at 9 in the evening, thrown his tools in the truck bed, and driven up without much thought about it. The furnace had a cracked heat exchanger and a failed igniter, not complicated, just time-consuming, and by the time he had it running again and made sure Bud's pipes hadn't frozen, it was pushing 2 in the morning. He was tired. His hands smelled like machine oil, and there was a bruise forming on his left forearm where he'd caught the edge of a sheet metal housing. He wanted coffee and his own couch, and 8 hours of sleep he probably wouldn't get. Lily was staying next door with May Coulter, who kept a spare room ready for exactly this kind of situation. Lily knew the drill. She'd been doing this drill since she was 3 years old, because her father was the kind of man people called at 9 o'clock on a Monday night during a blizzard, and being his daughter meant understanding that. Ethan saw the shape at roughly 2:12 a.m. It was just off the right shoulder, maybe 30 yards ahead, darker than the snow around it. Wrong geometry for a drift, too angular. He took his foot off the gas and let the truck slow. His first thought was a cow that had wandered down from somewhere and gotten itself stuck. His second thought, a half-second later, was the right one. That's a vehicle. He pulled over as far as he dared, killed the engine but left the hazards going, and got out. Cold was immediate and physical, like walking into something solid. 22 below with wind chill, probably worse up here on the exposed stretch. He ducked his head and moved toward the shape, and 15 feet out, he could see it clearly. A black SUV. High-end, half buried against the guardrail where the shoulder dropped off toward the creek bed below. The front right corner was crumpled. She'd gone off the road, caught the rail, and the snow had done the rest, piling up against the driver's side until the whole vehicle listed 10 degrees to the left. He tried the driver's door first. Jammed. He went around, fighting through knee-deep drift, and got the passenger door open on the second pull. The woman inside was unconscious. She was sitting in the driver's seat with her head tipped back and slightly to the left, the airbag deployed and deflated against her lap. There was blood on the right side of her forehead, not heavy bleeding, but enough that it had tracked down her temple and dried against her jaw. Her right hand was in her lap at a wrong angle, and even in the dark, Ethan could see the swelling around her wrist. She was dressed for a city wool coat, leather boots with a heel, a silk blouse visible beneath the open lapels. No gloves. The car was cold. Not as cold as outside, but close. The engine was off. He checked the ignition and found the key still in it, turned to the accessory position, the dash clock reading 11:47 p.m. more than 2 hours ago. She'd been here for over 2 hours. Hey. He reached in and put 2 fingers against her neck. Pulse was there slow, but regular. Hey, can you hear me? Nothing. He pulled off his outer glove and put his hand against her cheek. Cold. Not hypothermia cold, not yet, but getting there. Pulled back her eyelid carefully and used the flashlight on his phone to check her pupil. It contracted. Good sign. He checked the other one. Also good. Probably a concussion rather than something worse, but he had no way to know how much worse without equipment he didn't have. He tried his phone. No signal. He knew there wouldn't be, had known since he left the Halverson Ridge, but he tried anyway, because it was the first thing you did, because sometimes hoping cost nothing. No signal. He looked around the interior of the SUV. On the back seat was a leather duffel bag, half open, a laptop visible inside. On the passenger seat, a phone with a cracked screen and a dead battery. On the dashboard, a charging cable that had come loose from the phone at some point. He found a business card in the cup holder. Vivian Hart, Chief Executive Officer, Arcturus Technologies Denver CO. He put the card in his pocket. The nearest town with emergency services was Ridgeline, 14 miles north. In these conditions, an ambulance from Ridgeline would take 45 minutes minimum, probably longer, and that was assuming anyone could reach a dispatcher. The hospitals in Aspen was 30 miles south. The cabin was 4 miles east, 8 to 10 minutes on the road he'd just driven, if nothing went wrong. Ethan looked at the woman in the seat for a moment and made the calculation. He'd made similar calculations before, in other circumstances, and he'd learned that the ones that seem like choices usually aren't. All right, he said, mostly to himself. Let's go. He found a space blanket in his truck's emergency kit. He kept the kit current. Always had. Old habit, and wrapped it around her before he moved her, checking her neck carefully before he did anything else. Her neck was mobile. No obvious rigidity. No point tenderness when he pressed along the vertebrae. Not definitive, but enough. The wrist was a problem. He improvised a brace from a folded fleece he kept behind the seat and secured it with a length of paracord before he lifted her. She made a sound when he moved her. Something between a moan and a word, unintelligible. I've got you, he said. Don't fight me. She didn't fight him. She went limp against his chest, and he got her out of the SUV and across the distance to his truck in 3 careful minutes, watching where he put his feet, keeping his body between her and the worst of the wind. He got her in the passenger seat and buckled her carefully, got back to the driver's side, and started driving. The 4 miles took 22 minutes. He talked to her the whole time, because he'd learned that talking sometimes kept the unconscious tethered, gave them something to follow back. He wasn't sure he believed it completely, but he'd seen it enough that he kept doing it. Stay with me. Road's rough, but we're close. You're going to be okay. Stay with me. She didn't respond. Her head rested against the window, and every so often her lips would smile slightly, like she was trying to answer something asked in a dream. The cabin was small and warm when they got there. Ethan had left the wood stove burning before he went to the Halverson place, and the interior was 68 degrees when he pushed open the door with his shoulder, Vivian, in his arms. He laid her on the couch, the one piece of furniture in the main room that was long enough, and got 2 thick blankets over her before he did anything else. Then he worked. The head wound needed cleaning. He kept a field medical kit in the cabin, not a suggestion, a habit that had calcified into something he couldn't stop doing, and he cleaned the laceration with saline, pressed a gauze pad against it, and held pressure until the bleeding slowed. Cut was maybe 2 inches, not deep enough for stitches, but close. He closed it with butterfly strips and covered it with a non-adhesive pad. The wrist he splinted properly now that he had the right materials, padding it well and securing it snug. She made a sharp sound when he handled it, the first real sound she'd made, since the SUV and her eyes came partway open. Hey. He stayed at eye level, kept his voice even. You were in an accident. You're in my cabin. I'm not going to hurt you. Her eyes moved. Focused, unfocused, focused again. Her voice came out scraped and thin. Where my Creston County, about 4 miles east of Route 9. I found your car against the guardrail, near mile marker 31. You've been unconscious for a while. She tried to sit up. He put a hand on her shoulder, not hard, just present. Not yet. You've got a concussion. Give yourself a minute.
I need to. She stopped.
Seemed to lose the sentence somewhere. My phone. Dead, your charger's still in the car. I brought your bag. It's by the door, but I don't have cell service out here anyway. Nobody does in this weather. Roads are closed. She lay back. Her eyes tracked the ceiling, Then the wood stove, then his face. Who are you? Ethan Calloway. How did you find me? Drove past your car. Saw the shape through the snow. 2 in the morning. I was coming back from a neighbor's place. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her processing the way her eyes moved, the small frown working itself out across her forehead. The concussion would make this harder, he knew. Gaps in the reasoning. Things coming and going. Vivian, she said, as if she needed to remind herself. I know. I found your card in the cup holder. A noise that might have been a short laugh. Of course you did. He got water and made her drink it slowly. She managed half a cup before she turned her head away. He checked her pupils again, still equal, still reactive, and her pulse, and her skin temperature. Warming. Not fast enough, but warming. He added another blanket. Try to sleep, he said. I'll wake you every 2 hours. That's for concussions. Yes. She looked at him with more focus than before. Are you a doctor? No, you know what you're doing. I know enough, he said, and left it there. He didn't explain. He made himself coffee from what was on the shelf grounds. Not good ones, but they'd been there less than a week, and sat in the chair by the stove with the mug in both hands, listening to the wind work against the roof and the walls. Outside, the storm had crossed from severe into something else, something that didn't have a comfortable word for it. Cabin was built solid, old timber construction, and it had stood through worse. Probably. He thought about Lily, asleep at May's place 4 miles down the valley. May had raised 5 kids and buried 1 husband, and had the particular competence of someone who had never once panicked about the things panic couldn't fix. Lily was fine. He held on to that and let the rest of it go. Vivian slept. He woke her at 4, and she came up fast and disoriented, grabbing his wrist with her good hand before she remembered where she was. It's Ethan, he said. You're okay. She let go. Her hand dropped to the blanket. Sorry. Don't be. Can you tell me your name? Vivian Hart. I know what year it is and who the president is, so don't bother. He almost smiled at that, pain level 1 to 10. She took stock. Head is maybe a 6, wrist is a 7. Everything else is just miserable. That's honest. I'm always honest at 4 in the morning. No energy for anything else. She looked at the dark window. Is it getting worse out there? He didn't soften it. Yes. How long before the roads open? If it breaks by dawn, maybe tomorrow afternoon. But it's not breaking by dawn. She absorbed that without visible panic, which he noticed and filed away. People under stress showed you what they were made of in the first 12 hours. The ones who fell apart fast usually fell apart completely. The ones who got quiet and calculating were different. She got quiet. There's ibuprofen in the kit, he said. I'll get you some. Thank you. She paused. Ethan. Yeah. Why did you stop? It was 2 in the morning in the middle of a blizzard. You had no reason to stop. He thought about it for a second. The real answer was complicated, and he didn't feel like unpacking it at 4A. In a storm, your brake lights were still on, he said. That was true. But it wasn't the reason. Not entirely. The reason was older and harder to explain, something built from years of training and loss, and the specific kind of restlessness that came from having once been responsible for other people's lives and never quite knowing how to stop. He got her the ibuprofen. She took it without water the first time, grimaced, then took the water cup he offered. You have a daughter, she said. He looked up. I saw a drawing taped to the inside of your truck door. Horses, I think. Child's drawing. Lily, he said. She's 6. She's with someone, my neighbor. She's safe. Good. Vivian's eyes drifted toward the stove. That's good. She was asleep again in 4 minutes, and Ethan sat back in his chair and listened to the storm and drank his bad coffee and didn't sleep at all. By 6 in the morning, the wind had picked up further. He could hear it in the roof, a particular high note that meant the load was building. He went outside twice before 7, once to clear the exhaust vent on the generator, once to check the roofline over the main room, digging through chest-high drifts with a flashlight between his teeth. The snow was wet and dense, the worst kind for weight accumulation. He made a mental note of the section over the kitchen. There was already a bow in the roofline there that had been there since he bought the place, and this kind of loading didn't help it. Inside, he made oatmeal and more coffee and tried to get the battery radio working. It gave him weather and static in equal measure. The storm was forecast to continue through the following day, possibly longer. Roads in Cranston County were closed indefinitely. There was no timeline offered for reopening. When Vivian woke the third time at nearly 7:30, she was more herself. She sat up slowly, assessed the room, and accepted the coffee he handed her without ceremony. You didn't sleep, she said. I slept a little. He hadn't. She looked at him over the mug. There was something measuring in her expression, the same look people got when they were trying to figure out if someone was lying out of politeness or necessity. She'd seen his face when he said it. She'd known immediately. What do you do? She asked. When you're not pulling people out of snowstorms. Fix things, he said. That's not specific. Cars mostly. Machinery. Whatever people need. She waited, and when he didn't add to it, she tilted her head slightly. You cleaned and closed that wound on my forehead in the dark, she said. You splinted my wrist correctly, which I know because I've had a sprained wrist before, and this feels different. You've checked my pupils 6 times without making it seem like you were doing anything. That's not what mechanics know. I had training, he said. What kind of training? He looked at her steadily. The kind that was a long time ago. She let it go. Not because she'd lost interest, he could see she hadn't, but because she understood, in the way that people who were accustomed to managing others understood, that pressing harder right now would get her exactly nothing. Outside, the storm kept building, and somewhere in the roof above the kitchen, the first crack had already begun. The crack Ethan had heard in the kitchen roof at 6 that morning didn't announce itself again until nearly noon. In the hours between, the cabin settled into the uncomfortable rhythm of 2 strangers sharing a small space during a disaster neither of them had planned for. Ethan made oatmeal that was adequate and nothing more. Vivian ate it without complaint, sitting upright on the couch with a blanket across her lap and the splinted wrist resting on a folded towel he'd positioned at the right elevation. She drank 3 cups of coffee. He noticed she took it black, no hesitation, which told him something small but accurate about her. He checked the roof load again at 8. Then at 10. The bow over the kitchen had deepened subtle, maybe a 1/4 inch more than before, but he knew what he was looking at. He'd grown up in Wyoming and spent enough winters in old timber buildings to understand what snow weight did to structures that were already carrying a compromise. He started quietly moving things. His dry food stores, the water jugs, the generator fuel cans. He moved them from the kitchen toward the main room without making it a production, without explaining what he was doing. Vivian watched him from the couch. Your staging supplies, she said. He looked over. Just organizing. You moved the food away from the kitchen. Fuel cans. You did it in a specific order. She paused. You think the roof is going to fail. He straightened up and looked at her without the deflection he'd used that morning. She'd earned a straight answer. There's a section over the kitchen that I've been watching since last winter. It was already stressed. The load we've gotten in the last 8 hours is beyond what I'd like it to carry. He set down the fuel can he was holding. I'm not certain, but I'm not going to pretend I'm not thinking about it. What do we do if it goes? Move to the back bedroom and block the connecting door. The structural load on that section is separate, different beam configuration. It'll hold. How long have you been watching that roof? Since I bought the place. And you didn't fix it. It was on the list. He picked the fuel can back up and kept moving. Life gets in the way of lists. Vivian didn't respond to that immediately. He could hear her shifting on the couch, the small involuntary sound she made when her wrist moved wrong. Pain had settled into something chronic now, a constant low signal that occasionally spiked when she forgot and used the wrong hand. My company has a 17-item infrastructure maintenance backlog, she said after a moment. Things we flagged 18 months ago. Some of them are still flagged. What happens when one of those fails? I get a call at 3 in the morning. She paused, which I suppose isn't so different from what happened to you last night. He looked at her across the room. It was the first thing she'd said that felt like it was reaching toward honesty rather than managing him. Not so different, he agreed. The storm outside was relentless. The wind had developed a particular pattern, a long building pressure, followed by a sharp gust that made the walls shudder, and it had been doing this for so many hours that Ethan had stopped consciously registering it. It was just the background now, the way traffic noise became invisible to people who lived near highways. He'd grown up around hard weather. He'd also spent years in places where the ambient sound was worse and more dangerous, and you learned to file it away or it would grind you down. He built the fire higher and brought Vivian more ibuprofen at 11. She took it, checked her watch out of habit, then seemed to remember the situation. It's 11:14, he said. How do you know? Clock on the radio. She looked at the radio on the shelf. It was an old thing, battery-powered, the kind that looked like it belonged in a different era. Is there any update? Storm holds through tomorrow. Roads stay closed. That's what they had at 7. and I don't expect it'll change. My assistant is going to escalate to full crisis protocol by noon, she said. It wasn't a complaint exactly, more an observation about the machinery that would begin running without her. They'll contact Colorado State Patrol, file a missing persons report, dispatch a company helicopter as soon as the airspace clears. Then someone will find your SUV eventually. When they do, they'll trace it back toward where I live, and they'll find us. If the airspace clears. If, he said. She accepted the word without flinching, which he respected. They didn't talk for the next hour. Ethan worked small tasks, the kind that any remote cabin accumulates in winter, checking the pipe insulation under the kitchen, topping off the wood stove, inventorying what food he had, and calculating how long it would stretch between two people. Vivian read on her phone, not her work phone that was still in the SUV dead. This was a personal phone she'd had in her coat pocket, which had survived on low battery, though she had no signal. She had a book on it, he saw, when she tilted the screen. Not a business book. A novel, something thick and old-looking. "What are you reading?" he asked. She seemed mildly surprised he'd asked. "Middlemarch. George Eliot. You like old books." "I like books where people make consequential decisions and have to live with them afterward." She turned the phone screen down. "It's clarifying. Does it help for work, I mean? It reminds me that problems don't change that much. Scale changes. The vocabulary changes. The essential problem that people want things that conflict with what other people want has been the same for about 3,000 years." She tilted her head. "Do you read?" "Some." "What?" He thought about it. "History. Technical manuals. Whatever Lily leaves lying around, which is mostly books about horses." A small smile crossed her face, the first real one he'd seen. It changed her expression considerably, made the CEO part of her recede and something warmer come forward. "How old is she?" Vivian asked. 6'7" in March, and she likes horses. Obsessively. We don't own a horse. We have never owned a horse. She has explained to me in significant detail why this is a mistake on my part. Vivian laughed briefly, then stopped because the movement jarred her head. She pressed her fingers gingerly to her temple. "She sounds like she knows what she wants." Since she could talk. He looked at the stove. "She gets that from her mother." The words sat in the room for a moment. He hadn't meant to say it quite like that, with that particular weight, but it had come out before he could edit it. Vivian didn't press. She just gave it the room it needed. "She must be worried about you," she said finally. "Your daughter. She's with a good neighbor, May Coulter. She's been May's backup grandchild since she was about 2. He cleared his throat. "She won't panic. She'll ask May if Daddy is okay, and May will say yes, and she'll believe it because she trusts May. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for." He paused. "Or we tell ourselves that because we need it to be true." Vivian looked at him carefully. "Do you believe it?" "Most days." The radio crackled at 11:30, and they both turned toward it. A weather update, the same information repackaged in different phrasing. Nothing new. Ethan turned the volume down slightly and went back to what he was doing. It was Vivian who broke the quiet this time. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. "In this cabin, I mean. On this mountain." 3 years. "Where were you before?" "Virginia. Northern part. Before that, various places that didn't have permanent addresses." She absorbed that. Military. He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either, and she read the silence correctly. "What branch?" "Navy." "How long?" 14 years. She looked at his hands, his posture, the way he moved through the cabin with an economy of motion that wasn't learned from fixing cars. Special operations. It wasn't really a question. He let the silence handle it again. "You don't have to talk about it," she said. "I know. I'm asking because I'm trying to understand who you are, not because I want a story." She shifted carefully on the couch, adjusting the arm. I'm sitting in a stranger's cabin in the middle of a blizzard because he stopped his truck at 2 in the morning and decided my life was worth his trouble. I think I'm allowed to be curious about who that person is." He sat down in the chair across from her. It was the first time he'd sat since early morning, and his body registered the rest with something approaching relief. He looked at the fire for a moment. "I was a SEAL," he said. 14 years active, last 6 on a team that did the kind of work that doesn't get press releases. He paused. "I retired when my wife got sick. We came back to the States, settled in Virginia, and I spent the next year trying to figure out how to be a husband and a father and not a soldier, in that order. And then she passed. 2 years after I got out." He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. She was sick for about a year before the end. I knew it was coming, we both did, but knowing doesn't really prepare you. Nothing really prepares you. Vivian was quiet. He could see her measuring what to say, which he appreciated. People who immediately said, "I'm sorry," in that reflex way, he understood it. It wasn't their fault. There was nothing else to say, but it always felt like a door closing instead of opening. She said, "What was her name?" "Mara." "What was she like?" He thought about it. The real answer, not the polished one. Stubborn, brilliant, infuriating sometimes, in the specific way that people are infuriating when they're almost always right. She had opinions about everything and the data to back them up, and she didn't care if that made you uncomfortable. He paused. She was the most organized person I've ever known. When she got sick, she organized that, too. What do you mean? She left a notebook for Lily. For me, practical things: Lily's school schedule, her allergies, her quirks, what she was afraid of, how to handle it. Doctor's appointments, dental records, everything. He rubbed the back of his neck. She spent her last months making sure everything would keep running after she was gone, making sure I'd know what to do. That sounds like love, Vivian said quietly. It was. It was also, he stopped. It was also her way of not letting me have the conversation about what was happening. She stayed practical because staying practical kept her in control, and she needed to be in control. I understood it. I still understand it. But there were things I needed to say to her that I never said, because every time I tried, she'd redirect to the next item on the list. He hadn't said that to anyone. Not to May, not to his buddy from the teams who called on the anniversary every year, not to the grief counselor he'd seen 3 times before quietly stopping. Came out now because the storm had stripped something away, or because Vivian Hart was a stranger who would be gone in 48 hours, and there was a specific freedom in that. Or maybe he was just tired enough that the editing mechanism had stopped working. "I'm sorry," Vivian said. But she said it differently than people usually said it. She said it like she meant the specific thing, the conversation that never happened, not just the death itself. 3 years ago, he said. It doesn't get easier. It gets different. She nodded once. She understood that distinction in some way, he could tell. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "Where were you going last night?" "At 2 in the morning in a blizzard on Route 9. She looked at the fire. The question had weight, and she took a moment with it. "Driving back from a board dinner in Aspen," she said. "It was supposed to end at 9. It ended at midnight because 3 of my board members spent the last 2 hours trying to convince me to accept outside investment from a group that wants operational control in exchange for capital." She said it flatly. "I said no. They said I was being emotional. I drove home in a blizzard at 2 in the morning rather than stay another hour in that room." "Is that normal? That kind of pressure?" "It's been escalating for about a year." She flexed the fingers of her good hand, then stopped. "Arcturus Technologies was my company. I built it from a rented office space and 2 engineers who believed in something I described on a whiteboard at 1 in the morning. We were 23 years old." She paused. "Now it's worth $900 million, and there are 147 people who have opinions about what I should do with it, and most of those opinions have very little to do with what I actually built it for." "What did you build it for?" She turned and looked at him directly. "Software. Tools that help people with physical and cognitive impairments interact with technology without needing specialized hardware. Simple, affordable, scalable." She paused. "We're profitable. We have a good product. But the growth isn't venture capital growth, which means the people around the table keep pushing me toward enterprise licensing deals and pivot strategies that would make us a lot of money and help about 1/10 of the people we help now. And you won't do it. I haven't done it. There's a difference." She looked back at the fire. "I've been saying no for 2 years, but they keep restructuring the ask, finding new angles, new allies on the board. It's like, you know, that feeling of holding a position that you know is right, but you're not sure how much longer you can hold it." "Yes," Ethan said. He knew that feeling with a precision that had nothing to do with boardrooms. "That's where I've been for 2 years." She shifted on the couch. "And last night I sat across from men who have never met a single person who uses our products, and watched them describe my company as a philanthropic inefficiency, and I drove home in a blizzard rather than smile and tell them I'd consider it." "Good," he said. She looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "Not as a compliment, just as an observation. The things worth holding are usually the ones that cost you something to hold." Vivian studied him for a moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" I don't know. Someone quieter, maybe. Someone who would hand me aspirin and stoke the fire and not ask questions. I can do that instead if you want. No, she said it quickly. No, I don't want that. He didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything, and the fire worked steadily in the stove, and the wind pushed hard against the north wall, and neither of them reached for a way to fill the silence. Then the roof went. Didn't collapse completely. Ethan heard the sequence clearly, the deep creak of the stressed beam letting go, then a sharp crack, then the sound of snow weight redistributing in a way that timber framing is not meant to handle. Kitchen ceiling dropped 4 inches on the east side, with a sound like a gunshot and a shower of plaster dust that rolled through the cabin door in a gray cloud. Ethan was on his feet before the echo died. Bedroom, he said. Not loud. Not panicked. Just certain. Vivian was already moving off the couch, on her feet, her face tight with the effort of moving the wrist. She didn't stop to ask questions or hesitate at the door. She moved. He grabbed the supply bag he'd prepositioned by the main room wall, the one he'd quietly stalked that morning, and followed her down the short hallway into the back bedroom, pulling the door behind him and jamming a folded towel against the bottom gap to keep the dust out. Cabin groaned once more, a long settling sound, and then went quiet except for the wind. They stood on opposite sides of the small room, both of them breathing, both of them listening. The main structure is fine, Ethan said. He was reading the sounds the cabin was making, the way a doctor reads a patient's breathing, looking for the specific irregularities that meant something worse was coming. There were none. That was a section failure, not a full collapse. The bedroom is on a separate beam load. Vivian was very still. You knew it was going to do that. I thought it might. You moved the supplies this morning. Yes. You positioned that bag specifically for this. I wasn't sure, but I thought it was worth being ready. She sat down on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since she'd woken up that morning, she looked genuinely shaken. Not falling apart, not that. But the controlled, calibrated CEO composure had cracked slightly around the edges, and beneath it was just a woman who had just heard a ceiling collapse 6 feet from where she'd been sitting. You saved my life twice in the same 24 hours, she said. He put the supply bag against the wall and sat in the wooden chair in the corner. The first one was the one that counted. Don't do that. Don't diminish it. He looked at her. She was looking straight back at him, and there was something fierce in it. Okay, he said. You're right. She exhaled. Her hand came up to her forehead, touching the edge of the bandage there, not pressing, just checking. A gesture he'd seen her make 6 times, probably without knowing she was doing it. The bedroom was smaller than the main room, with a single window that showed nothing but white, a full-sized bed with a wool blanket, a dresser, and the wooden chair. There was a space heater in the corner that he plugged into the room's dedicated outlet. The generator was still running, would run for another 14 hours on what he had, and it began to tick and warm. Outside, the storm continued its work. The mountain didn't know them. Cold didn't care what they'd built, or what they'd survived, or who they were to anyone waiting for them at lower elevations. It was just weather, doing what weather did. But inside the room, something had shifted between the two of them in the particular way that disasters shifted things not manufactured, not forced, just stripped down to what it actually was. 2 people, a bad situation, and the strange intimacy of having nowhere else to be. Tell me about Lily, Vivian said. Her voice had come back to something steadier. What is she actually like? Ethan looked at the space heater for a moment. Talks constantly, he said, from the moment she wakes up until she physically can't keep her eyes open. She asks questions about everything, not rhetorical questions, actual questions that she expects complete answers to. Last week, she asked me why the sky is blue, and when I explained Rayleigh's scattering, she asked me if the sky feels lonely being a color nobody can touch. He paused. She's funny, and she's sharp, and she's got her mother's way of looking at you, like she already knows what you're about to say and has already decided whether it's correct. Vivian was smiling, the real one again, the one that made her different. She sounds terrifying, she said. 6 years old, and already the most demanding person in my life. He said it with the particular helpless warmth that parents use when they're pretending to complain. She decided 3 weeks ago that she wants to be a marine biologist and a horse trainer simultaneously. I didn't explain why that might be logistically complicated. I figured she'd work it out. Smart, she will work it out. She'll probably find a way to combine them and make me feel like an idiot for doubting it. Does she know about your time in the Navy? The shift was subtle, but he felt it. She knows I was in the military. She knows it's why we moved around when she was little. She knows her dad has a job where he helps people when things go wrong. She just thinks that means fixing furnaces and trucks. He looked at the window. It's enough for now. When she's older, she can decide what she wants to know. Is it hard, keeping that part of yourself separate? He thought about it seriously. It's not separate, exactly. It's more like there are things I know and things I can do that I earned in ways I don't want to explain to her yet. But they're also just part of what I am. She sees the effect without knowing the cause. He paused. Kind of like how she knows I always check the doors twice at night, and she doesn't ask why anymore. She just knows that's what I do. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then I grew up with a father who had things he didn't talk about, too. Military? No, just hard. He worked in a steel plant in western Pennsylvania for 29 years. 3 injuries, 2 rounds of layoffs, and a pension that didn't cover what they told him it would. He never complained. He never explained. He just got up every morning and went. She paused. I spent a lot of my childhood being angry at him for not talking, and then I got older and built my own thing and realized I'd done exactly the same. Made the hard choices quietly and expected everyone around me to understand without explanation. Does it work for running a company? It works for making decisions. Terrible for everything else. She said it without self-pity, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had spent real time thinking about it. I'm 31 years old, and I could tell you the revenue breakdown of every product line we run, and I couldn't tell you the last time I had a conversation like the one we're having right now. In a crisis, he said. With a stranger, she agreed. In a snowstorm. After the ceiling fell in. Not the typical setting. No. She looked at him steadily. But I'll take it. He nodded slowly. He didn't say that he agreed with her that this conversation, in this damaged cabin in the middle of a storm that had no timeline, was more honest than anything he'd managed in the last 3 years, with people who'd known him for decades. He didn't say it because saying it would have been too much, too fast, and he was a man who had learned, the hard way, that the distance between recognizing a true thing and acting on it needed to be crossed carefully. But he thought it. Outside, the wind eased slightly just for a moment, just enough to hear the snow falling rather than being driven. Then it built again, steady and patient, and the small room held its warmth against the night that was coming, and neither of them moved to break what had settled between them. Vivian reached out with her good hand and turned off the bedside lamp, leaving only the orange glow of the space heater against the walls. Get some sleep, she said. You haven't slept in almost 24 hours. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running on caffeine, and whatever it is that people like you run on when you're supposed to be running on nothing. She pulled the blanket up with one hand. I'll wake you if something happens. I know what to listen for now. He almost argued. Then he looked at the chair he was already sitting in, and at the woman across the room who was watching him with the same measuring expression she'd used that morning. Except now there was something else in it that he couldn't quite name and wasn't sure he should try to. He leaned back in the chair. He was asleep in less than 4 minutes. Vivian lay in the dark and listened to the storm and to his breathing and to the cabin making the small sounds of a structure, adjusting to damage and cold, and the particular physics of a mountain winter, and she thought about her company and her board and the dinner she'd walked out of, and then she stopped thinking about those things because they seemed very far away and not nearly as real as this room, this man asleep in a wooden chair, and the snow that kept falling outside a window that showed her nothing but white. Ethan woke at 4 a.m. in the wooden chair, with a stiff neck and the immediate, trained-in awareness that something had changed. Took him 3 seconds to locate it, the wind. The constant pressure that had been working against the north wall for the better part of 2 days had dropped, not stopped entirely, but shifted down from a roar to something closer to a moan, intermittent rather than sustained. He sat forward and listened with his whole body the way he'd learned to listen, in places where the quality of silence told you whether you lived or didn't. The cabin was settling differently. The small pops and creaks of stressed timber had slowed. The space heater glowed orange in the corner, the room holding its warmth. Across the room, Vivian was asleep. She'd turned on her side at some point, the splinted wrist resting on the pillow in front of her, the blanket pulled to her shoulder. Her breathing was slow and regular, and the bruising along her temple had darkened overnight to a deep purple red that would look worse before it looked better. In sleep, she looked younger than 31. The composed executive expression she wore when she was awake, the careful neutrality that kept people at a functional distance, was completely gone, and what remained was just a person who had been through something hard and needed rest. He stood carefully, keeping the chair from scraping the floor, and went to check the damaged section of the cabin. The kitchen ceiling had come down partially the east side. The section he'd been watching had dropped and buckled. One beam cracked through at the mid-span, and the planking above it splitting open to show insulation. And, above that, the gray pre-dawn light coming through the snow that had partially filled the gap. It was cold in the kitchen, brutally cold, the temperature probably matching the outside air. He stood in the doorway and assessed it without going in. Structurally, it was done that section was compromised, and he wouldn't put weight beneath it until he'd repaired it properly, which wasn't happening today. But the rest of the cabin was intact. The bedroom, the main room, the hallway between them. The generator shed outside was holding. The stovepipe was clear. The things that needed to work were still working. He went back and built the fire in the main room stove, working quietly, and put water on for coffee. Outside, through the main room window, he could see that the snow had stopped. The sky was still gray and low, but it was a different gray. The thick, active gray of a storm mid-process had become the flatter, exhausted gray of something that had given most of what it had. The drifts were enormous, the tree line barely visible beyond them, but the air between the cabin and the trees was no longer white with driven snow. He stood at the window for a long moment. The highway would still be closed. The roads in the valley would be impassable for at least another day, probably two, while the county plows worked through the priority routes. The worst of it, he thought, was over. The cabin had taken its hit. They'd adapted. The rest was just waiting. He heard her moving down the hallway at around 6:30, the careful footsteps of someone navigating an unfamiliar space while managing pain, and then she appeared in the doorway of the main room, still wearing yesterday's clothes, silk blouse now thoroughly wrinkled, and her wool coat draped over her shoulders like a blanket. "Kitchen," she said, looking through the open doorway at the collapsed section. "Don't go in there. I wasn't going to." She turned her attention to the main room, which was intact, and to the coffee on the small camp stove he'd set up near the wood stove. "Is it over?" The snow stopped, winds dropping, roads are still closed. "But the worst part is over." "I think so." She sat down on the couch and accepted the coffee he poured her. Her hair was loose now. She'd unpinned it at some point during the night, and it fell past her shoulders in a way that was entirely different from the put-together version of herself she'd been presenting since she woke up in his truck. She looked like a person instead of a role, and he thought she probably didn't realize how visible the difference was. "How's the wrist?" he asked. "Convincingly terrible." She tested the fingers of the splinted hand, opening and closing them slowly. "The feeling is good. Circulation is fine. Whatever you did it right. It needs a real X-ray. There could be a hairline fracture. The splint isn't quite aligned for." "I know. When we get out." He nodded and sat in the chair with his own coffee, and they were quiet in the way they'd been quiet the night before, not awkwardly, not filling the space with noise for the sake of it, just two people who had been through something together and didn't need to narrate it back to themselves. It was Ethan who broke it, which surprised him. "I want to tell you something," he said. Vivian looked up. "Last night, what I said about Mara the notebook, the way she handled it." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I've never said that to anyone. Not to her family, not to my team guys, not to May, who has known me for 3 years, and watched me raise Lily from 50 feet away." He paused. "I don't know if that matters to you. I just wanted to say it clearly, instead of letting it sit there like something I accidentally said." Vivian held his eyes. "It matters. I'm not telling you because I'm looking for something," he said. "I'm telling you because you said last night you were always honest at 4 in the morning, and I figure 8 in the morning is close enough to the same thing." Something in her face shifted in a way that was difficult to read, not sadness exactly, not surprise, more like someone who had expected a door to be locked and found it standing open. "What did you need to say to her?" she asked. "The thing you never got to say." He was quiet long enough that she might have taken it back, offered him a way out. Didn't. "That I was scared," he said. "That I needed her to stop organizing long enough to let me be scared with her. That I didn't want to be useful. I just wanted to be her husband for whatever time we had left. And I couldn't figure out how to ask for that without making it about me when it was supposed to be about her." He set the cup down on the floor beside the chair, trying to take care of me by leaving everything in order. "I know that. I've known that for 3 years. But I needed something she didn't know how to give, and she was gone before either of us figured out how to say it." Vivian was very still. I think she knew, she said carefully. I think people who love each other know what the other person needs, even when they can't give it, which might have been its own kind of pain for her. He looked at her. I'm not saying it to make it easier, she said. It might actually make it harder. But I don't think you were invisible to her. He picked the coffee cup back up. His jaw was tight and he made a deliberate effort to relax it. No, he said. I don't think I was either, he paused. I just spent a year being angry at a dead woman for not doing something she didn't have the capacity to do, and that's its own mess to live with. Have you, mostly? He looked at the stove. I loved her. I still do, in the way you always do. But I stopped being angry a while ago and started just missing her in the real way. Complicated way. The way where you remember who she actually was, not just who you needed her to be. Outside, a section of snow slid from the shed roof with a soft, heavy sound, and they both turned toward the window, automatically. Then, back. I want to tell you something too, Vivian said. He waited. I had a partner. In the company, at the beginning, his name was Daniel. He was one of the 2 engineers who believed in the whiteboard. We were together for 4 years. Work and personal, which is always a terrible idea, and we knew it and did it anyway. She looked at her coffee. He wanted to build a life, an actual life, outside the company. He wanted us to get married, have children, take vacations to places without Wi-Fi. The whole thing. And you chose the company. I chose the company every single time. She said it without self-pity, but without gentleness toward herself either. Just the flat statement of a true thing. Not because I didn't love him. I think I did, or I loved a version of him, the one who was content to want what I could give him, which was never as much as he deserved. When he finally left, he was kind about it. He told me he'd spent 4 years waiting for me to arrive somewhere that I'd already decided not to go. Where was that present? She said. Just present. Not always thinking about the next problem, the next round, the next quarter. Just in the room he was actually in. She paused. I told myself I was building something that mattered, which was true. But it was also very convenient. You think you hid in the work. I know I did, she said it simply. Work is safe. Work has clear metrics. You succeed or you don't, and the reasons are usually identifiable. People are different. You can do everything right and still lose them. You can love them correctly, and they leave anyway. The company never left. The company just kept growing and demanding more, and I kept giving it, because that felt like something I could control. She paused. Took until very recently to understand that control isn't actually what I wanted, just what I defaulted to when I was afraid. What happened recently? She looked at him. I'm 31 years old, and I've been driving alone on mountain roads in blizzards at 2 in the morning because I can't stand 1 more hour of people who should be my partners treating me like an acquisition they haven't fully closed. She let that land. That happened recently. Ethan was quiet. He thought about the woman in the SUV, the leather boots with the heel, the silk blouse, the laptop in the bag, and the particular kind of loneliness that came not from having no one around you, but from being surrounded by people who wanted things from you, rather than simply wanting you. My teammate, he said. Marcus Webb, best operator I ever worked with, the kind of person you trusted your life to without thinking, told me something once on a long watch. He said the worst kind of alone is the kind where you're too busy to notice it until it's all you can feel. Vivian looked at him. Is that what it's been like? Since Mara? No. He thought about it honestly. I notice it all the time. I've just gotten good at filling the space so it doesn't have room to get loud. He paused. Lily helps, but she's 6. She can't be the thing I use to not be lonely. That's not a fair thing to put on her. You know that, though. That's something. Knowing it and not doing it are different problems. Yes, she said. They are. The fire was burning steadily, and the space outside the window was brightening incrementally as the cloud cover thinned somewhere above them. The kitchen remained closed off and cold and broken, but the main room was warm, and the coffee was still hot, and neither of them was trying to be something they weren't. It was the most normal Ethan had felt in longer than he wanted to admit. He got up and checked the roof load on the intact sections, a practical thing, a necessary thing, and also something to do with his body while his mind settled back into itself. He went through the main room ceiling carefully, running his hands along the beam junctions, pressing at the junctions where he knew the timber was oldest. Everything held. The load had redistributed after the kitchen section failed, which was actually better in a structural sense. The pressure that had been building unevenly was now spread across the remaining sound framework. He came back in and reported this to Vivian with the same directness he'd used about everything else. Because she'd shown him she preferred information to reassurance, and she listened with the same focus she gave everything. "So we're stable," she said. "For what we need. We're not going to host a dinner party, but we'll hold until the roads open. I'll table the dinner party." He almost smiled, probably wise. She stood and moved to the window, standing where he'd stood earlier, looking out at the drifts and the pale sky and the pine trees gradually reappearing as the visibility cleared. She stood with her good hand, holding the splinted wrist against her midsection, a posture she'd developed over the past day to protect it without thinking about it. She looked out for a long time. "Can I ask you something?" she said, still facing the window. "Yes. When you were doing whatever it was you did. Before, the work you don't talk about." She paused. "Did it take something from you? Something you haven't gotten back?" He thought about lying or finding a diplomatic middle answer. He didn't. "Yes," he said. "What?" "The ability to assume things are fine. The baseline that most people carry that says the world is basically safe and bad things are exceptions." He looked at his hands. "I used to have that. I don't think I noticed I had it until it was gone. Now I'm always reading the room, reading the exits, reading the faces. It's not anxiety exactly. It's more like the scan never stops. I can put it in the background, but it doesn't turn off." "Does it make you feel safer?" "It makes me more effective," he said carefully. "It's not the same thing." She turned from the window and looked at him. "No," she said, "it's not. What made you ask?" She considered the question. "The way you moved through the cabin this morning, checking things. Methodical, quiet, like you were running a checklist you don't need paper for." She paused. "My father used to do something similar. After the second layoff at the plant, he checked the doors and windows every night before bed. Every single night for the rest of his life. My mother thought it was a habit, thought it was something else." "What did you think it was?" "Someone keeping watch because they'd learned the cost of not keeping watch." She said it simply. "I never asked him about it. I wish I had." Ethan felt something in his chest that was specific and not easily categorized. Not romantic, or not only that, not yet, not cleanly. More like the particular feeling of being seen accurately by someone who was doing it honestly rather than strategically, and having it be neither threatening nor unwelcome. "Your father sounds like someone worth knowing," he said. "He died 6 years ago." Before any of this, she gestured vaguely at the air between herself and the window, meaning the company, the money, the whole constructed world of Arcturus technologies before any of this was real. He never saw it. She paused. "I spent a lot of years building it partly for him, I think. Prove something. And then he was gone before I could show him, and I kept building anyway because I didn't know how to stop." What would he have said if he'd seen it? She thought about it for a long moment. He would have said, "Good girl. Now go get some sleep." Her voice was steady, but her throat moved. He was not a complicated man about the things that mattered. Those are usually the ones worth listening to. "Yes," she said. "They are." They ate lunch from the camp stove canned soup, the kind that was better than it had any right to be when you were genuinely cold and genuinely hungry, and Vivian asked him about the team, about what it was like to serve with people at that level of trust, and he found himself telling her things he hadn't talked about in years. Not the classified things, not the operational specifics, but the texture of it, the boredom that was always worse than the fear, the strange domesticity of men in close quarters, depending on each other for everything. Black humor that emerged from sustained stress as a survival mechanism and became its own kind of language. "You miss it," she said. "Not a question. Parts of it. I miss the clarity. Civilian life is more complicated in certain ways. The stakes are real but diffuse. Nobody briefs you at the beginning and tells you what the objective is and what success looks like. That's exactly what building a company is like," she said. "I imagine. You set your own objectives and then second-guess them because nobody confirmed them from above. You succeed and then wonder if you succeeded at the right thing." She pushed the empty soup cup aside. "At least in your work, someone else's life was the objective." That's not ambiguous." "It's not ambiguous," he agreed. "Cost of that clarity is high." "What's the cost?" "You spend years in a world where the worst possible thing is always the most likely possible thing. And then you come back and live in a world where most people have never seriously considered that the worst possible thing might happen, and you can't figure out how to exist in both at the same time." He looked at the table. "You love your daughter, and you live on a mountain, and you fix furnaces at 2 in the morning, and that's a real life, a good life. But part of you is always somewhere else, doing the math on threats that don't exist here. Part of you was somewhere else last night when you stopped for my car, she said. He looked up. The person who stopped in a blizzard in the middle of the night on a road with no cell service, who got out and went to look, that person wasn't just a mechanic coming home from a neighbor's house. That person was still running the old software. She held his eyes. I'm not saying it like it's a bad thing. I'm alive because of it. I'm just saying it accurately. He held her gaze for a moment. That's an accurate way to say it. Thank you for still running it, she said. And the way she said it was completely without performance, no drama, no weight added to it. Just a true thing, said plainly, by someone who meant it entirely. He nodded once. He couldn't quite trust his voice right then, so he didn't use it. The afternoon passed in a different rhythm than the previous days. The urgency had gone out of the situation, the immediate survival calculus was settled, and what remained was time, unstructured and unhurried, which was a thing that neither of them was particularly practiced at. Ethan went outside twice to assess the road conditions, and both times came back with the same answer. No movement. Deep drifts. No plow sounds from the valley yet. He cleared the path between the cabin and the generator shed, moving snow with the wide aluminum shovel he kept by the door, working steadily until his shoulders ached and the cold had gotten into his collar, and he felt better, the way physical work sometimes metabolized what thinking couldn't. Vivian watched him through the main room window when he came back in the second time. You shovel like you're angry at the snow, she said. Snow started it. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. And Snow's been acting up all week. I'm just responding proportionately. He stamped his boots at the door and hung his coat. How's the head? Less than yesterday. Still feels like someone replaced my brain with a grapefruit. That's normal for a concussion. Reassuring. It gets better by day 3. It's day 2. Then you've got something to look forward to. She looked at him over her good shoulder with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and amusement, and the exasperation part was clearly the one she was pretending to lead with. He thought she was probably very good at pretending, in certain contexts, and very bad at it in others, and being trapped in a mountain cabin for 2 days had pushed her steadily into the category where the pretending didn't take. He sat back in the chair and picked up a 3-month-old magazine that had been on the shelf since his last supply run, a hunting and fishing publication he'd already read twice and paged through it without really reading it. Vivian sat with her personal phone on her lap, scrolling through things she'd apparently downloaded before the battery got low, or just sitting with the dark screen in her hand as a habit. The light shifted in the window. The fire needed feeding every 40 minutes, and he fed it. At some point in the mid-afternoon, she said, Ethan. Yeah. Do you think people actually change? Or do they just get better at managing the things about themselves that don't? Put the magazine down. It was the kind of question that announced the conversation they'd been circling since that morning. I think the distinction matters less than people think, he said. If you manage something well enough for long enough, you've changed what it does to you, even if you haven't changed what it is. That sounds like something someone who's been in therapy says. Grief counselor. 3 sessions. She was good. I was bad at it. Why? Because I went expecting her to fix something, and she kept asking me how I felt about things. And I had a lot of feelings, and none of them were organized in a way I could explain without it taking an hour per feeling. He paused. I'm better with problems that have solutions. Feelings aren't problems with solutions. That is exactly what she said, almost word for word. Vivian smiled at the middle distance. Smart woman. Very. He looked at the window. I think about what she said sometimes, when I'm doing something else. It works better than doing it in a room. Is that what this is? The Storm's version of therapy? I don't know what this is, he said honestly, but I don't think it's a bad thing. She turned to look at him. The late afternoon light was doing something particular to the room. The sun had broken through the cloud cover somewhere above the valley, and the reflection off the snow outside was filling the main room, with a diffuse white glow, soft and without shadows. In that light, she looked less like a person being battered by difficult circumstances, and more like a person who had come through something and was standing on the other side of it. Can I tell you what I think is happening? She said. Yes. I think we both got good at being needed, she said. You as a soldier, then as a father, then as the person the town calls at 9 o'clock at night. Me as a founder, as a CEO, as the only person who actually understands what the company is for. And we got so good at being needed that we forgot to figure out what we actually need. She paused. And the storm took away all the things that let us keep pretending that was working. He was quiet for a moment. That's accurate. It's uncomfortable. Yes. But it's all she stopped. Seemed to be selecting carefully. It's also the most honest I've been about my own life in a very long time, and I'm saying it to a man I met 48 hours ago in the middle of a disaster, and I can't quite figure out if that means I'm finally getting something right, or if it means I've been getting it wrong for longer than I realized. Ethan leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at her directly. Maybe those are the same thing. She held his gaze, and something passed between them that was entirely real and entirely unforced, and also entirely complicated. Because they were two people who had just spent 2 days being stripped down to their actual selves, and actual selves were messy, and the attraction of a moment like this wasn't always the same thing as the capacity to sustain it outside the moment. He knew that. He was almost certain she knew it too. "I don't want to be stupid about this," she said quietly. "Then let's not be. That's not always a choice people can make from inside a blizzard." "No," he said, "it's not." She looked at him. He looked back. The fire ticked in the stove. Neither of them moved, and both of them were acutely aware of exactly how much they were not moving, and what that cost, and what it meant that they were paying it. 6 weeks, she said. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "Give me 6 weeks, she said, after we get out of here. 6 weeks to go back to my life and figure out what's actually mine in it and what I've just been carrying because I didn't know how to put it down." She paused. "And then I want to know if this, whatever this is real outside this cabin. Whether it survives ordinary Tuesday mornings and my terrible work hours and your daughter's opinions about horses." He looked at her for a long moment. "Lily's opinions about horses are non-negotiable," I assumed. The corner of her mouth moved. 6 weeks, Ethan." "Okay," he said. Simple. Direct. The way he answered things when he meant them without qualification. She let out a slow breath that was not quite a sigh, something closer to relief, or resolution, or the particular exhale of a person who has said the true thing and discovered the ground didn't give way under it. Outside, the last of the stormlight was dying, the blue-gray of early mountain evening settling across the drifts. The road would open tomorrow, or the day after. An ambulance would come, or a plow would clear the way, or someone would get through from the valley and find them exactly as they were alive, functional, changed in ways that didn't have simple names. But that was tomorrow. Tonight there was the fire, and the sound of the wind still working in the pines, but lighter now, tired now, and the cabin that had taken its damage and held everything inside it that mattered. Ethan got up and put more wood on the fire. The wood caught, and the orange light moved on the walls and the ceiling, and on Vivian's face, and she watched it burn and didn't say anything. And neither did he. And the silence between them was not empty. It was full of every true thing that had been said in this room over the past 2 days, and it held them both the way a solid structure holds what's been given to it, not perfectly. Not without stress, but firmly enough to matter. The plow came through at 11:17 the following morning. Ethan heard it before he saw it, the low diesel grind working up from the valley, the particular sound of heavy equipment pushing weight rather than carrying it. He was outside clearing the path to the generator shed when the machine appeared around the bend, orange and enormous, its blade sending a wall of snow to the right shoulder. Behind it, about 200 yards back, a county sheriff's truck with its lights going. He went inside and told Vivian. She was sitting on the edge of the bed in the back room, trying to put her coat on one-handed, which was not going well. She'd been attempting it for about 3 minutes and was at the stage where the frustration was winning over the practical problem. He took the coat and held it, so she could work the splinted arm through carefully without bending the wrist. "Thank you," she said. Quiet, specific, not the reflexive kind. "Sheriff's coming up the road behind the plow," he said. "Probably had a report on your car." "My assistant filed a missing persons report 18 hours ago. She said it without satisfaction, just stating the mechanism. There will be people." She paused, looking at nothing in particular. "There will be a lot of people very quickly." "I know." She stood and looked around the small bedroom, the wooden chair he'd slept in, the space heater still glowing in the corner, the wool blanket on the bed. She looked at it the way people look at a place they know they won't see again for a while, doing the work of remembering it. He picked up the supply bag and her leather duffel, which he'd brought in from the main room, and they walked out together. The sheriff's deputy was named Crane Young, competent-looking, very cold. He had a first aid kit in his truck that he opened immediately when he saw Vivian's bandaged head and splinted wrist, and Ethan stood back and let the man do his job, answering questions briefly when asked. Yes, he'd found her on Route 9. Yes, the wrist needed imaging. Yes, they'd been in the cabin since approximately 2:30 that morning 3 days ago. Deputy Crane kept looking at him with an expression that was part professional assessment and part something else, the kind of look people gave when the facts they were hearing didn't quite resolve into a shape they recognized. She was in that SUV for over 2 hours before you stopped. Crane said, not accusingly, just working through it, wit. Yes. 2 in the morning. No cell service. Storm at Category 3. Yes. Crane looked at him for another moment, then nodded once and went back to filling out his report. Whatever shape it had resolved into for him, he'd apparently decided it was sufficient. Vivian was on her phone now. The deputy had one she could use, her battery replaced with a portable charger from the truck, and Ethan could hear her half of the conversation from 15 feet away. Her voice had shifted completely. It was the CEO voice again, crisp and efficient, the emotion compressed into a working register that moved fast and made decisions, and didn't leave space for anyone to insert doubt. Told her assistant she was alive and functional and needed a car to Ridgeline Hospital and then to Aspen by this afternoon. She told someone named Porter that the board meeting scheduled for Thursday was postponed until further notice. She told a third person he couldn't tell who that she was aware of the media inquiries, and no, she was not making a statement. He watched her and thought, there she is. The other version. The one she'd been before the cabin, the one she would have to go back to being. He thought it without judgment. He understood about the other version. The drive to Ridgeline was 28 minutes with the plowed road and the deputy's truck, and Vivian sat in the back seat with her phone and worked through the 18 hours of messages and escalations that had accumulated while they were cut off. She did it methodically, the way she did everything. But twice she looked up from the screen and found Ethan looking out the passenger window at the white-covered valley, and both times she didn't say anything, but she didn't look away immediately either. The hospital in Ridgeline was small 12 beds, a 2-person radiology department, an emergency room that functioned on the principle that most mountain emergencies were broken bones, altitude sickness, or frostbite, and this one split the difference between all three. The doctor who looked at Vivian was a compact woman in her 50s named Bauer, who had the brisk efficiency of someone who had seen everything twice and stopped being impressed by any of it. X-ray confirmed a fracture, a distal radius fracture, minimally displaced, which was doctor language for broken in a way that wouldn't require surgery, but would absolutely require a proper cast and 6 weeks of limited use. Dr. Bauer looked at Ethan's field splint with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You did this?" she asked. "Yes. Not bad alignment." She said it the way mechanics said not bad when they actually meant this is better than expected and didn't want to encourage repetition of the behavior. The fracture didn't displace further. That's partly the splint and partly luck. Mostly luck, Ethan said. Vivian got a cast. She chose blue without much deliberation, just pointed at it when doctor. Bauer offered the color options, and Ethan noticed but didn't say anything. The head wound was cleaned again and reclosed properly, and Dr. Bauer confirmed what Ethan had diagnosed. Moderate concussion, no intracranial involvement visible on the scan, rest and monitoring required for the next 10 days. No screens, Dr. Bauer said. Vivian looked at her. I have a company. You have a head injury. Those two things are going to have to coexist. Dr. Bauer looked at her for a moment, then at Ethan, then back. Limited screens. Not while lying down. Stop immediately if you get visual disturbances, worsening headache, or nausea. She paused. And I mean it about the rest. Brains aren't made of whatever you think you're made of. Vivian said, I'll manage, Dr. Bauer said. That's what they all say. It was while they were waiting for the discharge paperwork that May Coulter appeared in the doorway with Lily. He hadn't called, May hadn't been able to. No signal, but May had heard the sheriff's frequency on the scanner she'd kept running since the night of the storm, and she had put Lily in the truck and driven 40 minutes on cleared roads and walked into the emergency room with the particular expression of someone who has been keeping calm for 3 days and is now choosing to continue keeping calm, rather than show what the 3 days actually cost. Lily ran to him from the doorway. He caught her and lifted her, and her arms went around his neck with a force that was entirely disproportionate to her size. She buried her face against his collar and said nothing for a moment, which was the most telling thing she could have done, because Lily never said nothing. Hey, Bug, he said, his voice lower than usual. You didn't call, she said into his collar. Not an accusation of fact being reported, the way she reported things that bothered her, when she'd processed them far enough to say them calmly. I didn't have signal, I'm sorry. May said you were probably fine. May was right. I knew she was right. She pulled back far enough to look at his face. Her eyes were dry. She'd done her crying already, probably, in the privacy of May's spare room, where she was old enough to understand that some feelings were for when adults weren't watching. Who's that? He turned. Vivian was standing near the discharge desk, watching them. The CEO composure was still in place, but it had gone slightly soft around the edges, something in her face that wasn't there when she was on the phone. Her name is Vivian, Ethan said. She was in an accident. I helped her. Lily looked at Vivian with the direct, unfiltered assessment of a 6-year-old who had not yet learned that prolonged eye contact with strangers was considered rude. Vivian looked back with what appeared to be genuine attentiveness rather than the performed kind adults usually gave children. You have a blue cast, Lily said. I do, Vivian said. I broke my arm once. It was green. Green is better. I didn't know green was an option when I was choosing. Vivian said seriously. I should have asked more questions. Lily appeared to consider whether this was sufficient reasoning. You can put stickers on it, she said, apparently deciding to extend grace. That makes it better. I'll do that, Vivian said. Thank you. May was already beside Ethan, a hand on his arm, looking him over with the comprehensive efficiency of a woman who had raised 5 children and assessed injuries and general states of being from across a room for 40 years. You look like 3 days in a blizzard, she said. That's accurate. Lily was excellent. Mays said, in a tone that was a statement, but also quietly, a thank you for raising a child who handled things. I know she was, he said. Vivian's car arrived 40 minutes later, a company SUV driven by a man named Garrett who worked for Arcturus and had apparently driven from Denver the moment the roads opened, which Ethan gathered had been approximately 4 hours. Garrett was efficient and unobtrusive and made no comment about anything, which suggested he was very good at his job. Vivian stood in the hospital parking lot with the blue cast and the bandaged forehead and his old flannel shirts still visible at the collar of her wool coat. She'd borrowed it 2 days ago for warmth, and neither of them had thought about returning. It and the wind was cold and clean and nothing like what it had been for the past 3 days. I'll have the shirt cleaned and sent back, she said. Don't bother. He meant it both ways. She looked at him. Lily was beside him, her hand in his knees, drawing figure 8s in the snow with the toe of her boot and pretending not to listen, which meant she was absolutely listening. 6 weeks, Vivian said. 6 weeks, he said. She looked down at Lily, who immediately looked up with the alert expression of a child who had been caught pretending not to pay attention and decided the cover was no longer worth maintaining. It was nice to meet you, Lily, Vivian said. Lily looked at her with the same direct assessment as before. Then, apparently having arrived at a conclusion, she reached into her coat pocket, the one she kept her important things in, the folded drawings and the smooth rock she'd been carrying since August, and produced a slightly crumpled piece of paper. She held it out to Vivian. It's a horse, Lily said, because you seemed sad. Vivian took the drawing with her good hand. She looked at it for a moment, a yellow horse with an improbably long neck and 4 legs of different lengths and what might have been a flower in the background or might have been a cloud. She looked at it for long enough that Ethan wondered if she was going to manage her expression or not. She didn't entirely manage it. Thank you, she said to Lily. Her voice was level, but only just. Lily said, You're welcome. You can keep it. Vivian folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket. Then she looked at Ethan one more time, and what passed between them was not a word and didn't need to be. And she got in the SUV, and Garrett drove her away down the cleared road toward the highway. And Ethan stood in the parking lot with his daughter and watched the black vehicle until it was gone. Is she coming back? Lily asked. Maybe, he said. We'll see. Lily appeared to find this acceptable. She went back to drawing figure 8s in the snow. The next 6 weeks were the specific kind of difficult that didn't announce itself. It was quiet difficulty, the kind that accumulated in small daily doses rather than arriving all at once, the kind that was harder to explain to other people, because nothing was technically wrong. Nothing had collapsed or broken or stopped working. And yet the absence of something was loud in a way that ordinary life kept trying to drown out. Ethan repaired the kitchen roof in the first week. He called a structural engineer from Ridgeline who came out, assessed the damage, confirmed his own read of the situation, and left him with a repair plan that was ambitious but achievable. He spent 4 days on it, working with a crew of 2 local men he knew and trusted, and when it was done, the kitchen was structurally sounder than it had been before the storm. He stood in it on the 5th morning, drank coffee, and thought that Mara would have said it took a disaster for you to fix it, and she would have been right. He thought about Mara differently in those weeks. He'd been thinking about her the same way for 3 years, the grief calcifying into a specific shape, a particular weight he'd gotten good at distributing so it didn't slow him down. After the cabin, something had shifted in that. He couldn't locate the exact mechanism. It was something Vivian had said, maybe, or something about saying the true thing out loud that changed its mass. He still missed Mara. He still loved her in the ongoing way that didn't stop just because someone was gone. But the anger, the complicated, guilty anger about the notebook and the redirected conversations, and the things never said that had loosened. Not gone, but no longer calcified. He found himself talking to Lily about Mara more in those weeks than he had in the previous year. Small things Lily would ask why he kept the particular coffee mug with the chip in it, and instead of deflecting, he'd say it was your mama's. She got it in Portland when she was 25 and thought it was ugly, but she liked the size of it. And Lily would say, why did she keep it if she thought it was ugly? And he'd say because she was practical about things she actually used and sentimental about things she didn't. And Lily would say, I'm sentimental about everything. And he'd say, I know. Bug? You get that from her. And Lily would look satisfied in the way she looked when things turned out to fit together correctly. It was not large. But it was not nothing. He didn't contact Vivian. They hadn't exchanged numbers at the cabin. Her phone had been dead. His hadn't been relevant. And at the hospital, it hadn't come up in any natural way. He thought about reaching out through the company website or finding a contact and decided not to. 6 weeks was 6 weeks. She'd asked for the time and he'd given it to her, and trying to collapse it would be exactly the kind of impatience that turned real things into rushed things. He thought about her more than he expected. Not constantly. Not in the way that disrupted his days or displaced his attention from Lily or from work. But in the quiet hours, the early mornings before Lily was up, the long drives to supply runs in Ridgeline, his mind returned to the cabin and the conversations, and the particular quality of being known accurately by someone who had nothing to gain from the accuracy. He thought about the way she'd said, give me 6 weeks, with the same directness she'd used for everything else. The CEO instinct to make a decision and commit to it, rather than leave things unresolved. He thought about Lily's drawing going into the pocket of her coat. He thought, she'll come back or she won't. Either way, something has already changed. In Denver, Vivian was burning things down. Not literally, but the process, from the outside, probably looked similar. She'd spent the first week recovering, Dr. Bauer's instructions, followed, with the reluctant compliance of someone who understood the logic and resented the constraint. No screens while lying down. Limited hours. Rest that felt like deprivation because she'd been operating on 5 hours of sleep and continuous stimulation for so long that stillness felt like a malfunction. She lay in the apartment she kept in Denver, which was large and expensive and had a view of the mountains she almost never looked at, and she looked at it now and thought, I don't know a single person who has been inside this apartment for reasons that weren't work. She was 31 years old. She'd built something real and significant and genuinely valuable. And she'd done it at the cost of every other structure in her life, which she'd told herself was a reasonable trade, and which she was no longer sure about in the specific way that you stop being sure about something when you've been honest with a stranger in a damaged cabin for 3 days and come out the other side. She thought about her father. She thought about Daniel, her co-founder and former partner, who was running a small assistive tech nonprofit in Seattle now, and who had apparently been right about most things, which she'd known and not wanted to admit for a long time. She thought about the board dinner in Aspen and the men across the table and the drive home in the blizzard and the guardrail. She thought, I drove into a blizzard at 2 a.m. because staying in that room was more intolerable than the storm. That was not a sign of someone who had the right relationship with her own life. She called a board meeting at the end of week 2. Not the full board, a subset, the ones who had been waiting for a moment of vulnerability to push through the investment deal she'd been blocking. She'd been managing them individually for 18 months, playing a careful defensive game, and she was tired of the game. She came in with her blue cast and her healed temple, and a document that her lawyer had spent the preceding week preparing, and she put it on the table, and she said, I'm resigning as CEO effective end of quarter. I want to discuss the transition and my continuing role in innovation development. The room went very quiet. Richard Hartwell, the oldest board member, the one who'd been there since the Series A, the one who believed he understood the company better than anyone, because he'd watched it grow from a dollar amount, said, "Vivian, let's not make decisions while you're recovering from an injury." "I made this decision before the injury," she said. "The injury just clarified my timeline." There was a version of Vivian who would have said this differently, who would have framed it as her idea in a way that gave the board the illusion of participation. She'd been that version for 7 years. It was exhausting. "You've been CEO since inception," said Porter Gaines, who was technically her ally on the board but whose alliances shifted with the prevailing financial wind. "The company is identified with your leadership." "The company is identified with its mission," she said, "which I defined and built and intend to protect through the transition. I'm not abandoning anything. I'm choosing the part of this work that I'm actually good at and letting someone else do the part I've been tolerating." She paused. "I'm genuinely good at building things. I'm adequate at managing the structure around them. I'd like to stop being adequate and start being good again." The meeting went 2 hours. At the end of it, she had a framework for transition and an agreement to retain her as head of innovation, with a contract that gave her real authority over product direction. She'd given up the title and the formal power and the weight of the CEO role, and walking out of the conference room, she felt lighter than she'd felt in 2 years. Her assistant, Priya, who had been with her for 4 years and was probably the person who understood her actual daily functioning better than anyone, was waiting in the hallway. "How'd it go?" Priya asked. "I resigned." Priya's face did something careful. "Are you okay?" "Yes," Vivian said. And she was, which was its own kind of remarkable. The farmhouse she found in week 3 was not what she'd been looking for, because she hadn't been looking for a farmhouse. She'd been looking, in a general unfocused way, for something she couldn't quite name a reason to be in a different place, a different way of structuring her days. She'd been scrolling through property listings in the mountain counties on a Tuesday evening when she should have been sleeping and found it by accident. 42 acres, a 2-story farmhouse built in 1954, a barn that needed significant work, and a view of the western ridge that the listing photos undersold badly. It was 40 minutes from Creston County, 20 minutes from Ridgeline. Called the listing agent the next morning. She wasn't buying it because of Ethan. She was clear-eyed about that, or tried to be. She was buying it because she'd been telling herself for 10 years that she would someday have a place that was actually hers, not an investment property, not a luxury pied-à-terre for travel convenience, but a place with land and dirt and the possibility of growing something. The proximity to Creston County was not irrelevant, but it was not the reason. She bought it in week 4, cash. The process was fast enough to be almost unsettling. She stood in the empty farmhouse, on the morning the paperwork went through, and listened to the silence, which was a different kind of silence than the apartment in Denver, not the silence of absence, but the silence of possibility, space, waiting to be filled with something deliberate. She called a contractor. She started making a list. She had never been a person who didn't have a list. Week 5 was the one that nearly undone her. Came from an unexpected direction, not the board, not the transition process, not the mountain of practical decisions involved in acquiring a farmhouse and extricating herself from a role she'd held for 7 years. It came from a folder on her personal laptop labeled with Daniel's name old emails, photographs from the earliest days of Arcturus, the whiteboard photo from the night she'd described the company concept to him, and the third engineer, Marcus, who had since moved to Germany and started his own firm. She'd opened the folder looking for a specific document and found herself an hour later, sitting on the floor of her Denver apartment reading emails from a version of herself that was 23 years old and completely certain and slightly terrifying in the specific way that people are terrifying when they have nothing to lose yet. She thought about what that girl had cost herself. She thought about whether the price was right. She didn't come to a clean answer. Clean answers were for simpler equations, and she'd stopped expecting them in the second half of her time in the cabin. But she came to something close to peace with the ambiguity and understanding that the girl on the whiteboard and the woman in the farmhouse were the same person. Continuous, carrying the same core that had always been there, shaped differently by what the years had required. She called Daniel on a Wednesday afternoon, not to revisit anything. She was careful about that, careful to be clear with herself, but because she wanted to say something, She hadn't said at the time. He answered on the fourth ring. Vivian. Surprised but not unfriendly. I owe you an apology, she said. A specific one, not a general one. I knew what you needed, and I made a choice not to give it to you because I was afraid that giving it would cost me something else. That wasn't fair, and I should have said so a long time ago. There was a pause on the line. He stopped. Thank you. That means something. I hope things are good, she said. They are. Seattle is, she could hear him smiling slightly wet. But good. You? Getting there, she said. They talked for 20 minutes, careful, honest, the kind of conversation that was possible, now that there was nothing at stake but the truth of it. When she hung up, she sat for a while in the quiet of the apartment and felt something she hadn't expected. Not loss, exactly. More like the specific relief of a debt finally acknowledged, a reckoning completed. The 6 weeks ended on a Thursday. She was at the farmhouse. She'd been staying there 3 nights a week now, sleeping on the air mattress the previous owner had left behind, drinking coffee on the porch in the mornings, and watching the ridge go from black to gray to white in the early light. She had dirt under her fingernails from where she'd been attempting to understand the kitchen garden, which the previous owner had left in a state of optimistic chaos. She was not good at gardening. She was learning. She sat on the porch step with her phone in her good hand, the cast on the other arm starting to feel like part of her anatomy, and she dialed a number she'd gotten from May Coulter 3 days earlier, when she'd called May to introduce herself, and May had received this with the unhurried equanimity of a woman who had seen most things and found them manageable. He picked up on the second ring. Ethan, she said. Pause short but real. Vivian, it's been 6 weeks. I know. She looked at the western ridge. The morning light was doing the particular thing it did at altitude, that sharp clarity that didn't exist lower down. I resigned as CEO. I bought a farmhouse 20 minutes from Ridgeline. I've apologized to someone I should have apologized to years ago, and I'm attempting to grow tomatoes, which is harder than it looks. She heard something that might have been the start of a laugh, caught before it fully formed. How's the garden? Struggling. I'm not a natural. Most people aren't. I figure I'll get better. She paused. I made these choices independently. I want you to be clear on that. I'm not calling because I need rescuing or because I've constructed my life around something I felt inside a blizzard. I called because I made my own choices, and some of them happened to put me 20 minutes from you, and I want to see if what I think is real is actually real outside that cabin. There was a silence on the line. Not empty. Full. Come back, he said. 2 words, no elaboration, no hedging. She exhaled something slow and complicated. Okay, she said. I'll come Saturday. She came Saturday. The drive took 22 minutes, and she spent the last 5 of them on the mountain road that she knew now from a different direction, in better light, with functioning brakes and a clear sky and no blizzard rewriting the geography. She pulled up to the cabin, which had a new section of roof, visible at the east corner lighter timber, not yet weathered, and sat in the car for approximately 45 seconds before getting out. Ethan was on the porch, not posed, not waiting in any theatrical sense. He'd been doing something. There was a tool in his hand that he put down on the rail when he saw her car. He was wearing a canvas work jacket and his boots were muddy, and he hadn't shaved recently. And he looked exactly like the person she'd been thinking about for 6 weeks, which was both expected and still somehow a relief. Lily appeared in the doorway behind him before Vivian had taken 3 steps toward the porch. She looked at Vivian with the same direct assessment as the hospital parking lot. You came back, Lily said. I came back, Vivian said. Lily appeared to run her own quiet internal calculation. Do you still have the horse drawing? In my kitchen, at the farmhouse. Put it on the refrigerator. Lily looked at her father. She put it on the refrigerator, she reported, as if this were significant data that he needed. I heard, Ethan said. Lily appeared to reach a conclusion. She stepped off the porch and walked over to Vivian and took her good hand, because it was the reasonable one to take. Come, see what Dad fixed, she said, and pulled her toward the cabin. Vivian went, because there was nowhere else she wanted to be. Ethan watched them from the porch for a moment. Lily was already talking, explaining the roof repair in the particular detail-rich, slightly inaccurate way. She explained things she'd learned from him, and Vivian was listening with the attentiveness she gave everything worth paying attention to. He picked up the tool he'd been holding and put it in the toolbox and didn't say anything to the mountain or the sky or the morning air, because the moment didn't need his commentary. It was just a Saturday, ordinary and specific, and the woman who had asked for 6 weeks had used them well and come back on the day she said she would. And that was not everything. That was barely the beginning. But it was the beginning, and he knew the difference between a foundation and a finished thing. And this was solid under the weight of what he was willing to put on it. He walked inside and closed the door against the cold. The months that followed did not unfold the way movies suggested they should. There was no montage of perfect autumn afternoons and effortless laughter. There was no version of Vivian that arrived at the farmhouse already transformed, already knowing how to exist in a life this different from the one she'd built. And there was no version of Ethan that opened easily, that stopped double-checking the doors at night, or woke without the particular alertness of a man whose body had decided long ago that sleep was a risk to be managed rather than a comfort to surrender to. What there was instead was a Saturday in late April when Vivian's contractor discovered that the farmhouse foundation had a crack running 11 feet along the north wall, and the repair estimate came in at twice what she'd budgeted, and she sat on the porch steps with her phone in her lap and didn't call Ethan first. She called her accountant, and then her contractor back, and then she sat with the numbers until they made sense. And then she called Ethan and told him about it the way you told someone about a problem you'd already started solving. How bad? He asked. Annoying. The contractor says 6 weeks. Everything in your life takes 6 weeks. She was quiet for a second. Then, that's the funniest thing you've said to me. I have my moments. That was what it actually looked like. Not the dramatic version. The real version, which was two people learning the specific texture of each other's ordinary days and discovering that ordinary days were where the real information lived. Vivian drove to the cabin 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes she stayed for dinner, sometimes through the weekend, sleeping in the small room Ethan had set up with a proper bed and a lamp, and a shelf she'd put 3 books on that gradually became 7 and then 12. She did not move in that was a line both of them understood without drawing it explicitly, because the farmhouse was hers in a way that mattered, and giving it up prematurely would have been giving up something she'd just learned she needed. But she was there enough that Lily stopped noticing her arrival as an event and started incorporating it as a fact of the week, which was the thing Ethan had been quietly waiting for without saying so. Lily had opinions. That was perhaps the most consistent thing about her, the volume and specificity of her opinions on all subjects, distributed without hierarchy, so that her views on marine biology received the same gravity as her views on Vivian's coat color and whether the cabin needed a dog. She announced in early May that Vivian's cooking was trying too hard, which was accurate. Vivian cooked the way she approached most things, with research and precision, which produced technically correct food that had very little warmth in it. Lily said this with the unguarded honesty of a 7-year-old who hadn't yet learned the social cost of accuracy, and Vivian received it with a look that was partly wounded and mostly trying not to laugh. "She's not wrong," Ethan said from across the kitchen. "I know she's not wrong," Vivian said. "The risotto was very, if you say precise, I will not be responsible for what happens next." I was going to say ambitious. That's worse. Lily watched this exchange with satisfaction, which meant she filed it away as a successful contribution to the household dynamic. She was good at reading rooms. She'd inherited Mara's instinct for social calibration, and she had concluded several full decades ago that Vivian was a permanent feature of the landscape and therefore worth investing in. Her method of investment was instruction. She showed Vivian how to make the specific grilled cheese that Ethan made on Friday nights, which involved particular timing and a heat level that Vivian initially treated as approximate, and Lily corrected with patient precision until it was right. "Your daughter is more demanding than my former board of directors," Vivian said to Ethan one evening, after Lily had gone to bed. "Lily's demands are reasonable," he said. "Your boards weren't. Fair." She looked at the kitchen. "I think I'm getting better at the grilled cheese." "You are." Faint praise. Accurate praise. He looked at her across the table. "The risotto was also better last time." "It was," she agreed. "I stopped reading the recipe mid-cook. Turns out recipes work better when you trust them." He raised an eyebrow. "I know," she said. "I'm aware of the metaphor." What she was learning in those months was that she'd spent a decade being good at the wrong kind of trust. She'd trusted systems, processes, financial models. She'd trusted the logic of building something larger than herself and letting that largeness justify the personal costs. What she'd been bad at was the smaller, riskier trust, the kind that didn't have a term sheet, the kind you couldn't model in a spreadsheet, the kind that required you to put down your defenses and remain in the room when the room got uncomfortable. She was learning. It was slow and it was imperfect, And twice in those months, she retreated into the CEO version of herself mid-conversation with Ethan, and felt the distance open between them and had to make a deliberate choice to come back. Both times she came back. He noticed both times and didn't make it a point of confrontation, just waited, which was its own kind of lesson that patience wasn't passivity, that holding space for someone's difficulty was harder and more valuable than demanding they resolve it immediately. He had his own retreats. There were nights when something tripped the switch, a sound outside, a news story with particular content, a smell that didn't have a civilian explanation, and he went somewhere internal that Vivian couldn't follow. She'd learned not to pull him back, which had been her first instinct. She'd learned to just be present and let the distance close at its own speed. She'd asked him about it once, directly. "What do you need when it happens?" she said. "Just tell me." He'd thought about it seriously. "Nothing. Just don't make it a crisis when it's not." "Okay. It's not about you." "I know that. Some people don't know that." "I know that too," she said. "I spent a year thinking Daniel's sadness was about me. Took me an embarrassingly long time to understand that people have interior weather that has nothing to do with the people standing next to them." He'd looked at her for a moment. "Interior weather," he said. "Too poetic?" "No," he said. "That's actually exactly right." Lily's 7th birthday arrived in March, with the full force of Lily's expectations, which were significant, and had been communicated to everyone within reasonable range for approximately 6 weeks in advance. She wanted a horse cake, not a cake shaped like a horse. She was precise about this. A cake with a horse on it, painted in frosting, which she had seen in a video and determined was the correct approach. She also wanted to go see actual horses, which resulted in a Saturday at a stable 20 miles down the valley, where a woman named Carla ran a small therapeutic riding program and tolerated visitors with a generosity that Ethan suspected was partly genuine and partly strategic, since Lily had apparently been calling ahead to confirm the visit 4 separate times in the preceding week. Vivian made the cake. She spent 2 evenings on it. The first attempt produced a horse that Lily described diplomatically as more like a dog, and the second attempt, completed at 11:30 at night with Ethan sitting at the kitchen table pretending to read, was unambiguously a horse. Not a professional cake, not a bakery horse. A horse made by someone who had practiced once and cared enough to try again. Lily looked at it on the morning of her birthday with an expression that moved through assessment into approval. "It's good," she said. "Thank you," Vivian said. "The tail is really good." Tail was the hardest part. "I can tell you worked hard on it." Lily delivered this with the gracious acknowledgement of someone receiving an effort that met the standard, which was, from Lily, the highest available compliment. Ethan watched this from the doorway with his coffee and said nothing, because there was nothing to add. At the stable, Lily fell into a sustained state of happiness that was specific to people encountering the thing they've always wanted in its actual form rather than its imagined one. She was careful and attentive with the horses, which Carla noted with genuine approval. Some children came wanting to run at the animals, to own the experience immediately, and Lily was not that. Lily stood at the fence and waited and let the horses decide, which they did, a gray mare named Dory walking over with the calm curiosity of a creature that had learned to read intentions accurately. Vivian stood beside Lily at the fence. "She likes you," she said. "She's deciding," Lily said, which was exactly right. They drove back in the late afternoon, Lily asleep in the back seat inside 10 minutes. And Ethan drove, and Vivian sat in the passenger seat, and the mountain road was dry and clear, and the light was doing the long Colorado thing, where it seemed to hold longer than physics should allow. "She's going to need a horse," Vivian said quietly. "She doesn't need a horse. She absolutely needs a horse." "Vivian, the farmhouse has 42 acres and a barn." He was quiet for a moment. "You're talking about putting a horse in your barn." "I'm talking about the fact that there is a barn, and there is a 7-year-old who has needed a horse for approximately her entire conscious life, and those two facts are in the same geography, and it seems like a waste not to connect them." He looked at the road. "That's the most CEO framing of 'can we get a horse' that I've ever heard. Is it working?" "I'm thinking about it." "Good." She looked back at Lily, asleep with her mouth slightly open and her hand curled near her cheek. "She's extraordinary, Ethan." He didn't answer immediately. Kept his eyes on the road for a moment, and then said, simply, "I know." "You did that. Mara did most of the design work." "You built it," Vivian said. "Every day for 3 years you showed up and built it. That counts." He didn't say anything to that. But she saw his jaw and his hands, and the particular way he held himself when something had reached him, and he was deciding what to do with it. It was late June when he found Mara's notebook. He hadn't lost it, he knew exactly where it was, in the top drawer of the dresser in his room, beneath an old watch and the discharge papers from the Navy that he'd never quite filed anywhere. He found it because he was looking for the watch, and his hand closed around the notebook by feel, and he sat on the edge of the bed with it for a long time before he opened it. He hadn't opened it in a year and a half. Mara's handwriting was small and precise, exactly like her. The notebook was organized in sections with tabs she'd cut from cardstock Lily's health, Lily's school, practical notes, and then, at the back, a section with no tab label that he'd read once in the first month after she died and not again. He read it now. She'd written, "I know you need to say something, and I keep not letting you. I'm sorry for that. I'm not good at the kind of conversation you're trying to have, and I know that's not fair to you, but I don't have enough time left to get better at it, and I'm afraid that if we go there, I'll spend the time we have left grieving instead of living. I need to keep living until I can't. I hope someday you understand that." And below it, in slightly different ink, written at a different time, "You are going to be okay. Not right away. But you are going to be okay. And Lily is going to be okay. And I need you to believe that even before it's true. The last thing I'm going to ask of you." He sat with that for a long time. The thing he'd carried for 3 years, the anger at the redirected conversations, the grief about the things unsaid, settled into something different. Not resolved exactly, because grief didn't resolve the way equations did, but rearranged. She'd known. She'd known he needed something she couldn't give, and she'd written him the apology at the back of the notebook, where he'd find it when he was ready to find it. She'd organized that too in the end. He thought, "I'm angry, and I love you, and I understand, and I forgive you." And he thought it in the direction of somewhere he didn't have a name for, and it felt like the most honest thing he'd said to her since she died. He put the notebook back in the drawer. He called Vivian. "Come tonight," he said, "if you can." She heard something in his voice that didn't require explanation. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. She arrived to find him on the porch in the early summer dark, 2 mugs of coffee on the rail, Lily already asleep. She sat beside him, and he told her about the notebook, the section at the back, what Mara had written. He told it plainly, without editing, the way he'd learned to tell her things. When he finished, Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, "She knew you." "Yeah," he said. "She did. And she trusted that you'd be okay. Trusted it enough to write it down." He looked at the dark valley below. "I've been angry at her for not knowing me well enough to give me what I needed. Turns out she knew me well enough to know I needed to find it myself. Is that worse or better?" He thought about it. Both. Mostly better. He looked at her. "I wanted to tell you." "I didn't want to not tell you." She reached over and put her hand on his, not the splinted one. That cast was long gone, just her hand, warm from the coffee mug, on the back of his. She didn't say anything, and he didn't need her to. They sat there until the coffee was cold, and the valley below had gone fully dark, and the stars at that altitude were the density that always startled people who hadn't grown up seeing them. Vivian stayed the night, and in the morning she made coffee that was better than it used to be, and Lily woke and came to the kitchen and asked if Vivian could drive her to school because Vivian's car had a button that warmed the seats. "I'm not your personal heated vehicle," Vivian said. "But your car is very warm," Lily said. "That's not the point. I'm very cold in the mornings," Ethan said. Lily. "Dad's car is also cold," Lily said. "I'm just saying." Vivian drove her to school. She sat in the pickup line with Lily in the passenger seat and listened to Lily explain the current social dynamics of second grade with the analytical precision of someone who had done a thorough field assessment. And when Lily got out, she waved from the door, and Vivian waved back, and she sat in the parking lot for a moment after Lily disappeared inside. She thought, "I didn't come here for this. I came here for something I couldn't name, and what I found was this, which I also couldn't have named, but which fits in a way that the thing I came from never quite did." She drove back to the cabin. Ethan was in the driveway with the hood of his truck up, doing something to the engine with the focused patience he applied to all mechanical problems. And she parked and got out and leaned against the fender and handed him the coffee she'd brought in a travel mug. Took it without looking up. "How was the carpool line?" "I have new information about second grade social hierarchy." "Useful?" "Apparently Lily is the unelected mediator of at least 2 ongoing disputes." He looked up from the engine. "Why am I not surprised?" "She describes it as maintaining balance." She uses that phrase. She got that from a documentary about ecosystems. He looked back at the engine. She applied it to the classroom. It's working. According to Lily, it usually does. He made an adjustment with the wrench. She tell you about the reading group situation? The one where she got moved to the advanced group and now has complicated feelings about leaving her friends behind. That one. At length, Vivian said. She's working through it. She'll get there. I know. She's more emotionally intelligent than most adults I've worked with. He looked up again. Don't tell her that. Why not? She already knows. She doesn't need confirmation from an external source. Vivian laughed, the real laugh, the one that came out before she could shape it into something more composed. It happened more often now than it used to. She'd noticed this about herself, the way easy laughter came back when you stopped being guarded about the things that deserved to be let in. The proposal happened in August. It was not planned the way that proposals in movies were planned, with reservation confirmations and hidden rings and elaborate architecture. It was a Saturday afternoon, late summer, and they were in Vivian's garden, the kitchen garden that had started in disaster, and improved through sheer stubborn repetition until it was producing, finally, actual tomatoes and a quantity of basil that exceeded any reasonable personal need. Vivian was kneeling in the dirt in old jeans and a flannel shirt that had been his before it was hers, and had completed the transition without either of them formally acknowledging it. There was dirt on her face, and she was pulling weeds with the concentration she applied to things she'd decided to get right. And she looked nothing like the woman in the leather boots on the side of a mountain road a year and a half ago. Or she looked exactly like that woman, the actual one beneath everything the role had required her to be. Ethan had been sitting on the garden wall with his coffee, watching her, and something had settled in him the way things settled when they were right, and he'd stopped trying to talk himself out of them. He reached into his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying the ring for 3 weeks, which May Coulter knew about because he'd asked her opinion and May had looked at it and said about time without elaboration. It was a simple ring white gold, a small blue stone in the center, the blue of a cast chosen without enough information on a hospital morning a year and a half ago. He'd had it made by a jeweler in Ridgeline, described what he wanted, and the man had produced exactly that. Vivian, he said. She looked up from the weeds, a strand of hair across her face, squinting slightly against the afternoon light. What? I want to ask you something. She read his tone. Something in her face changed, not surprise exactly. More the look of someone who had been expecting a particular moment without knowing when it was coming and had just recognized it arriving. He got down from the wall and crouched in the dirt at the edge of the garden bed. He held the ring out, not in any theatrical way, just in his hand, direct and simple. I know what you gave up to build your own life before you came back here, he said. And I know you came back here for yourself, not for me. I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm not asking you to fit yourself into a shape that belongs to someone else. He paused. I'm asking if you want to build something together. Not the same life, a shared one, with all the parts that are already yours still being yours. With Lily, who has strong opinions about this, which she has not been subtle about. He paused again. And with me, who loves you. Not because of the blizzard. Not because of the 3 days. Because of every ordinary Tuesday since then, and because of who you are in this garden right now, which is nothing like what you were trying to be before, and exactly like who you actually are. Vivian looked at him. Her expression was doing several things simultaneously, the controlled version, fighting with the real version, and the real winning, which had been happening more and more often, and never stopped being something he was grateful for. Lily has opinions about this, she said. She said, and I'm quoting directly, you should ask Vivian because she's already basically here, and it would be better if it was official. Then she went back to her book. Vivian made a sound that was mostly a laugh, and partly something that wasn't. She looked at the ring in his hand. She looked at his face. Yes, she said. Simple. Direct. The way she answered things when she meant them without qualification. Put the ring on her finger. It fit. She looked at it for a moment, then at him, and then she leaned forward and kissed him. In the garden, in the dirt, in the late summer afternoon light, and it was not a perfect cinematic moment. There was a trowel somewhere nearby that one of them almost sat on, and her hair was still across her face, and neither of them managed it gracefully. It was entirely real, which was better than graceful. They told Lily at dinner. She listened to the announcement with the focused attention she gave important information, her fork partway to her mouth, and then stopped there, suspended. Then she put the fork down. "Does this mean Vivian's here all the time?" she asked. "More than now," Ethan said. "But she's keeping the farmhouse, so it's not all at once." Lily appeared to calculate this. "What about the barn?" Vivian said. "What about the barn? Is a horse going to go in it?" Ethan said. "Lily, I'm just asking. We are discussing the engagement right now." "I know. I'm very happy about the engagement." Lily said this with complete sincerity and zero pause. "I was also just asking about the horse. They're different topics." Vivian looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Vivian. "We'll discuss the barn," Vivian said. Lily picked up her fork. "Okay," she said, satisfied. They were married the following December, at the cabin. Not a large wedding. Ethan didn't have large in him, and Vivian had spent 7 years at events where largeness was a performance of significance rather than significance itself, and they were both past the stage of confusing the two. 12 people, which was enough. May Coulter, who cried once and denied it immediately. Marcus Webb, who flew in from wherever Marcus Webb currently was and shook Ethan's hand for a long time, and didn't say much because Marcus never needed to. Priya, Vivian's assistant, who had rearranged Vivian's professional life around a woman she genuinely liked and showed up with a gift that was both practical and funny. A few others, the ones who'd watched things change and been close enough to see it clearly. Lily served as flower girl in a yellow dress she had selected herself on the grounds that yellow was the right color for happiness. She had communicated this rationale to Vivian at length, and Vivian had agreed without hesitation, partly because she found it completely convincing, and partly because arguing with Lily about the metaphysics of color in relation to emotional states was not a battle she was interested in mounting. The cabin had been repaired, fully repaired, the east kitchen section rebuilt, and the whole structure reinforced at the bearing points that Ethan had been meaning to address since he bought it. It was sounder now than when he moved in. The ceremony was in the main room with the wood stove going and the light through the west window coming in low and winter clear, and the few people who mattered most were in it. The officiant was a civil celebrant named Pauline, who drove an hour and a half and charged a reasonable fee and delivered the ceremony with the no-nonsense warmth of someone who understood that the words mattered, but the people saying them mattered more. Ethan stood at the front and watched Vivian come through the door. She was wearing something simple and dark, not white, she'd said. White was not a color she'd ever felt right in, which was the kind of specific self-knowledge he'd come to understand was one of her best qualities. She was wearing the ring he'd given her in the garden. She was walking toward him with her eyes on his, and the small smile that was the real one, not the executive one, not the managed one. He thought about the guardrail on Route 9, the shape in the snow, the 5 seconds when he'd almost kept driving. He thought about what those 5 seconds had cost him nothing, as it turned out. Nothing but the comfortable fiction that his life was already complete, that he was managing well enough, that the useful version of himself was sufficient. The vows they'd written themselves. Not elaborate. Ethan's were short, because he was not a man who performed emotion in excess of what he felt, and what he felt was precise and specific, and had been arrived at through difficulty rather than ease. He said, "I'm not going to promise you a perfect life because I don't know how to build one of those. I'm going to promise you that when things go wrong, and they will, because that's the nature of things, I'll still be here. Still being honest, still doing the work. I love you for who you actually are, which includes all the parts you used to hide. I'm glad you stopped hiding them." Vivian had prepared something longer and abandoned most of it the night before. What she said instead was this: "I spent a long time building things and calling it living. And then a blizzard and a stranger with a flashlight showed me what I'd been missing, which was this. All of this. People who are real with me. A place that's actually mine. A child who corrects my cooking and makes me better at everything by refusing to accept less than I'm capable of." She paused, and her voice was mostly steady. "I love you for stopping your truck. I love you more for every ordinary day since then. I'm here on purpose, and I'm staying on purpose, and I just want you to know that." Lily, standing to the side in her yellow dress with her flower basket, said, "That was good," in a tone of genuine critical approval, which made several people in the room laugh, including the 2 people getting married. Pauline said, "I think that covers it. The years after were not the easy years. The years after were the real ones." There was the spring when Vivian's innovation work at Arcturus hit a product development wall that took 8 months to break through, And she spent those months cycling between focused problem solving and a gray exhaustion that Ethan recognized and didn't try to fix because he knew it wasn't fixable from the outside. He made sure there was coffee. He took the mornings with Lily so Vivian could start work early. He did the small things because the small things were what was available, and sometimes that was enough. There was the winter Ethan put his back out badly enough that he couldn't work for 3 weeks, not dramatic, not a crisis, just a compressed vertebra from lifting something wrong. But 3 weeks of enforced stillness in a man who metabolized movement was its own particular trial. Vivian managed the logistics without making it a project, organized the contractors who were doing the barn renovation, kept the cabin running, drove Lily to school, and came home to a man who was irritable from inaction and pain and tried very hard to be honest about it, rather than performing fine when he wasn't. One evening she sat beside him on the couch, where he'd been stranded most of the day, and said, "You don't have to be useful to be worth taking care of." He looked at her. "I mean it," she said. "You know I mean it." He did know. And knowing and fully believing were still two different things, 3 years into a life built on the ongoing project of learning the difference. "I'm working on it," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm working on things too. We can work on them at the same time." That was what it actually was, between them. Not the rescue. Not the blizzard, the cabin, the dramatic convergence of two unlikely people. Those were the beginning, and beginnings were not the point. Point was what came after, the daily practice of choosing the same things over and over, honesty over comfort, presence over management, the difficult conversation instead of the easier silence. The horse came in Lily's 8th year, a bay mare named Clover, who arrived at the farmhouse barn on a Tuesday in early spring and immediately established herself as a horse with opinions about most things. Lily cried when she saw her, which was one of approximately 4 times Ethan had seen his daughter cry since she was very small, and the crying lasted about 90 seconds before Lily wiped her face and walked directly to the stall with the focused intention of someone who had been waiting for exactly this and was not going to waste another minute. On feelings when there was a horse to get to know. Vivian stood beside Ethan at the barn door. "I told you she needed a horse," she said. "You were right. I'm often right. I know. You're very good at acknowledging that. I've had practice." She bumped her shoulder against his, and they watched Lily and Clover regard each other through the stall bars with mutual seriousness, each deciding what the other was made of. June was born in October of the following year, at the Ridgeline Hospital, with the characteristic impatience of a second child, who had apparently decided that the scheduled time was a suggestion rather than a plan. She arrived 6 days early and very loud, and the first thing Lily said when she held her new sister was, "She has opinions already," which was possibly the most accurate thing anyone said in the hospital that day. June had Vivian's directness and Ethan's eyes, which he noticed in the first hours, and then spent the next several weeks trying not to keep mentioning because he could tell it was something he'd never stop finding remarkable. And Vivian had specifically said, "Ethan, stop twice about it already." Lily took her role as older sister with complete seriousness, which was the only way she took any role. She explained to June, who was 4 days old at the time, the social dynamics of the household, and the naming convention for the horse's Clover was Clover, and the second horse, a smaller gray named Pebble, who Lily had negotiated into existence through a campaign of reasonable arguments and strategic timing, was Pebble. She explained that the cabin was where Dad was mostly comfortable, and the farmhouse was where Mom grew things and worked, and that they would both live in both places, and this was good because different spaces were good for different thinking. June blinked. She understood that, Lily said. "She's 4 days old," Ethan said. "She's listening," Lily said. "She's very serious." You can tell. He couldn't tell she was 4 days old. But he also knew better than to win an argument with Lily when she wasn't wrong in spirit, even if the specifics were debatable. The winter morning that stayed with him, the one that he found himself returning to in the months and years after, the one that seemed to gather the meaning of everything that had preceded it, came when June was nearly 2 and Lily was 9, and the mountain had received the first real snow of the season overnight. He was standing at the main room window with coffee in both hands, watching the snow come down, when Vivian appeared beside him. She hadn't heard her approach. She'd learned to move quietly in the cabin, some adaptation to his routines that she'd made without comment. June was in his left arm, awake, looking at the snow outside with the intense focus of a child encountering something she hadn't yet categorized. Down the hall, Lily could be heard opening and closing drawers with the decisive efficiency of a child who had already decided that today was a snow day and was preparing accordingly. The valley below was white. The pine trees along the ridge were carrying the new snow in the particular way they did in early winter, before the weight became too much, each branch perfect and temporary. The road was invisible. The sky was the low, close gray of more coming. Ethan stood at the window and let himself look at it. He thought about the night on Route 9, the headlights cutting nothing useful in the storm, the shape against the guardrail. He thought about the 5 seconds and the decision that hadn't really been a decision, it had been something older than decision. Some instilled reflex toward the thing that needed doing, regardless of cost or convenience. He thought, I was afraid, for a long time, that loving someone else would mean setting Mara down, that there was a fixed amount of whatever the capacity was, and using it again would mean taking it from somewhere it was still owed. He knew now that this was wrong. Not because the feeling had been unreasonable, it had been a completely reasonable fear, the kind that emerged from grief and made sense of itself in the dark. But because love was not a finite resource you drew down. It was more like a skill. Like everything worth having, it grew through use. The grief hadn't diminished his capacity. It had clarified it. It had shown him, at cost, what mattered and what didn't, what could be lost and what couldn't be taken. Mara had known he would be okay. She'd written it down. He believed it now. Not because time had made it true automatically, but because he'd done the work of making it true the daily, inglorious, unglamorous work of choosing to be present when absence was easier, to be honest when performance was available, to stay when leaving was always technically an option. Vivian was looking at the snow too. She had her coffee and his old flannel shirt, which had migrated so thoroughly into her regular rotation that it had ceased to be notable. She was barefoot on the cold floor, which she always was in mornings before she'd fully woken up, despite Lily's repeated observations that this was inefficient. You're doing the thing, she said quietly. What thing? The looking out the window, with a lot of thoughts thing. He looked at her sidelong. I'm just watching the snow. You're watching the snow and thinking about something you're about to not say. You're very observant. I've had practice, she said, using his words back at him, the way she did when she'd won a point and wanted him to know she'd noticed. He looked back at the window. June reached out a hand toward the glass, and he shifted to let her touch it, and she pulled back immediately from the cold and looked at her hand, and then at him with an expression of frank betrayal that was entirely her mother. I was thinking, he said, that the cabin collapsed and we rebuilt it, and that we're still here. Vivian was quiet beside him. She understood what he was actually saying. We're still here, she said. Down the hall, Lily appeared, fully dressed for snow, hat already on, listing the necessary equipment for a proper first snow of the season. She had opinions about sleds. She had organized these opinions. She was prepared to share them. Outside, the snow fell quietly over the mountains, not the driving lateral assault of a Colorado blizzard, but the considered, purposeful fall of a winter morning doing what winter mornings did. Ordinary, reliable, neither merciful nor cruel. Inside, the family remained. Ethan thought about the version of himself in the truck on Route 9, tired and cold and almost not stopping. He thought about what almost not stopping would have cost not just him, but all of this. The people in this room. The life that had grown from the decision to get out of the truck. He hadn't stopped because he was a hero. He hadn't stopped because he had calculated the odds and determined the right answer. He had stopped because a long time ago, someone had trained him to move toward the thing that needed doing, and the training had outlasted the context that created it, and found its use on a mountain highway in a blizzard at 2 a.m. with a woman he didn't know yet. The truth he'd arrived at, over these years, was simpler than he would have expected. Home was not a place you were assigned or inherited. It was not a feeling that arrived fully formed and announced itself. It was something you built, slowly and imperfectly, from the choices you made when nothing required you to make them, when you could have driven past, when you could have kept the notebook closed, when you could have let the 6 weeks pass without picking up the phone. Home was the accumulation of all the times you didn't drive past. Outside, the snow continued its work. Inside, June grabbed his collar with both hands and said something that was not quite a word yet, but was clearly an opinion, and Lily was still listing sled requirements with the thoroughness of a person who had thought about this for a while, and Vivian was laughing at something Lily said, her shoulder warm against his arm, the coffee in her hand going cold, the way coffee always did when the morning was better than expected. Storm had taken nothing that hadn't eventually been returned in a different form. And the cabin, rebuilt stronger at its broken places, held everything inside it that had ever mattered.